times when circumstances make perfect sense to us, as we try to understand each move he makes. When the path grows dim and our questions have no answers, turn to him. Bow the knee, trust the heart of your Father when the answer goes beyond what you can see. Bow the knee, lift your eyes toward heaven and believe the one who holds eternity. And when you don't understand the purpose of his plan, in the presence of the King, bow the knee. There are days when clouds surround us and the rain begins to fall. The cold and lowly winds won't cease to blow. And there seems to be no reason for the suffering we feel. We are tempted to believe God does not know. When the storms arise, don't forget we walk by faith and not by sight. Bow the knee, trust the heart of your Father when the answer goes beyond what you can see. Bow the knee, lift your eyes toward heaven and believe the one who holds eternity. And when you don't understand the purpose of his plan, in the presence of the King, bow the knee, trust the heart of your Father when the answer goes beyond what you can see. Bow the knee, lift your eyes toward heaven and believe the one who holds eternity. And when you don't understand the purpose of his plan, in the presence of the King, bow the knee, bow the knee, bow the knee. Bow the knee.
I want to take the time to read for you this morning chapter 3 in its entirety. We'll have a word of prayer, and we'll get into the message today. Joshua chapter number 3, starting in verse number 1. Joshua rose early in the morning. They removed from Shittim, came to the Jordan, he and all the children of Israel, lodged there before they passed over. Came to pass after 3 days that the officers went through the host. They commanded the people, saying, when ye see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, the priest and the Levites bearing it, that ye shall remove from your place and go after it. Yet there shall be a space between you and it, about 2,000 cubits by measure. Come not near under it, that ye may know the way by which ye must go, for ye have not passed this way heretofore. Joshua said unto the people, sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. Joshua spake unto the priests, saying, take up the ark of the covenant and pass over before the people. And they took up the ark of the covenant and went before the people. The Lord said unto Joshua, This day will I begin to magnify thee in the sight of Israel, that they may know that, as I was with Moses, so I will be with thee. They shall command the priests that bear the ark of the covenant, saying, When ye are come to the brink of the water of the Jordan, ye shall stand still in Jordan. And Joshua said unto the children of Israel, Come hither, and hear the words of the Lord your God. Joshua said, Hereby ye shall know that the living God is among you, that he will without fail drive out before you the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, and the Jebusites. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth passes over before you into Jordan. Now therefore take you 12 men out of the tribes of Israel, out of every tribe a man. It shall come to pass, as soon as the soles of the feet of the priests that bear the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of the Jordan, that the waters of the Jordan will be cut off from the waters that come down from above, and they shall stand upon a heap. It shall come to pass, when the people removed from their tents to pass over Jordan, the priests bearing the ark of the covenant before the people, and as they bear the ark were come unto Jordan, the feet of the priests that bear the ark were dipped in the brim of the water, for Jordan overfloweth all his banks all the time of harvest. That the waters which came down from above stood and rose up upon a heap, very far from the city of Adam, that is beside Zeratan. And those that came down from the sea of the plain, even the salt sea, failed. They were cut off. The people passed over right against Jericho. The priests that bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan. And all Israel passed over on dry ground unto all the people were passed clean over Jordan. Our dear gracious Heavenly Father, we ask now your blessing on the preaching of the word. Lord, we have an opportunity this morning as we come into your word and look at this account of how you worked among your people at a very specific place, very specific time, and in a very unique and miraculous way. Lord, may we learn the lessons that were given to us to glean from this passage. Lord, I pray that you guide my lips this morning to share those things which you would have for us today. We thank you. We ask this in your precious name. Amen. Began a couple weeks ago preaching through the book of Joshua, something that I wanted to do or felt that the Lord wanted me to do this year. And so even before I was away for a couple weeks there, we looked at the book of Joshua and some of the accounts leading up to this point. We even, 3 weeks ago, jumped ahead, and we already looked at verse number 4. Verse number 4 said very specifically at the end of verse 4, For ye have not passed this way heretofore, or you've never been this way before. And so I had a message just on that very verse, that very thought, a couple weeks ago. Today, we're jumping back to now chapter 3. We looked at chapter 2 last week, which was the account of Rahab. We're back in chapter 3. We're going to continue with the movement of the Israelite people as they're taking into the promised land, moving into the promised land. They're going to come up against Jericho here very shortly. But here in chapter 3, we have them beginning to move. They're beginning to move into the promised land. They're going to cross the Jordan River. And we see the accounts as they are given to us in, I think, great detail of all that takes place as they're getting ready to move. It tells us a couple things I want to highlight. Then we'll look at some principles I think we can glean from this chapter. Joshua rose early in verse number 1, and he began to organize everybody. It tells us in verse number 2, after 3 days, and commonly believed from that verse, commonly referred to in most commentaries or most books on this that have been written, most theologians through the time, that's 3 days it took for the leaders of the people to make their way through the entire congregation to tell them what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. In other words, they were very thorough in going throughout the entire congregation of the Israelites and giving them the details of what was going to happen. And it gives us some idea of the magnitude of the group of people. This was talked about much in our Wednesday Bible study as we looked in detail, over the last year, we looked in detail of the Israelites, them coming out of Egypt, coming to the banks of the Red Sea, then coming to the mountain where they received the Ten Commandments, and then, of course, ending up in the wilderness for 40 years. But we looked at that transition, and there are those and I would dare say they are liberal theologians or liberal Bible teachers who try to make a couple things less in that whole Bible account. One of them is less people. And so your more modern take on that famous Bible account of the Israelites leaving reduces that number to maybe 25,000, 30,000 people, as opposed to the million plus that the Bible gives us an account on. We have numbers actually given, right? Tribes and numbers and everything. But they try to make it a small group. Couldn't have possibly been that many. The other thing that they try to diminish then is the crossing of the Red Sea. That couldn't have been as dramatic as we make it. It must have been a shallow body, a small area, something the wind could have done. They try to make answers for those things, taking away the miraculous hand of God. I'm tying those together today because we see much of the same account happen now 40 years later. For 40 years, they've been wandering in the wilderness. For 40 years, everybody over the age of 20 has passed away, which means everybody that was 20 or older and saw the Red Sea part are with the Lord now, right? They've died. So now we have those that have been born, most of them, born in the wilderness wandering, or they were kids back then. And now they are going to see God do something miraculous for them, much the same. The other thing that I wanted to, I was getting ahead of myself a little bit, but to go back on is 3 days it took them to go through the congregation, which means it was a very large encampment, right? It wouldn't have taken 3 days to talk to a few thousand people. It would have taken 3 days for the authorities to go through and talk to more than 1 million people. It took them time to get the groups together, the tribes together, the leaders together, to vocalize this in detail to the mass amount of people. This is a large group of people that's moving, and God's going to do miraculous things for them along the way, just as he did 40 years ago. So, 3 days. They give them the command. The Ark of the Covenant is going to move first. So they didn't have the Ark of the Covenant at the Red Sea crossing, right? They didn't have that yet. God gave them the plans for that when he gave them Moses the law. And that was made and created and began to be used by God in a special way in their wanderings. So now they have the Ark of the Covenant. The other thing they don't have that was very important the first time, they don't have Moses, right? And Moses was there the first time. Moses put out his rod. Moses was a powerful leader, and everybody knew that. There were some times of rebellion through those different generations, but people knew he was the leader. God was doing something miraculous in his life. Moses is gone now, too. Joshua's the leader. There hasn't been any question to Joshua's leadership, but here's a big test. You have to get this big group of people across this flooded Jordan River and into this promised land. And as we do that, we're going to face some opposition. It's not going to be smooth sailing. People are not going to want to see us coming. So there's some obstacles here. So God said in verse number 5, Joshua said to the people, "Sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you." Verse 7, the Lord said unto Joshua, "This day will I begin to magnify thee," that's you, Joshua, "in the sight of Israel, that they may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with you." So God says, Joshua, I'm going to, here's God helping Joshua. I'm going to make sure that people realize that just like I was with Moses and did miraculous things, in the same way I'm with you. And the people will not be able to question your authority, God-given authority in this situation. They're going to see that same power and strength of God through the person Joshua as he's leading the people. So the instructions are the priests are going to go pick up with the staves. If you've seen the Ark of the Covenant. Hopefully, maybe at some point you've been able to. If not, I would encourage you, because of where we live in Pennsylvania, it is easy for us to access the tabernacle reproduction in Lancaster County. And I would encourage you to do so if you haven't done so. And we did that as a church trip a few years ago. We rented some vans. We all went down there. And of course, we stopped at Shady Maple since it was nearby. I mean, why waste that opportunity? But we spent some time at the reproduction of the tabernacle. And so I think that helps give us a good visual of what to expect. But the Ark of the Covenant was a piece of furniture, not unlike, size-wise, maybe our communion table, which we bring out the first Sunday of the month for the Lord's Supper. It was very ornate, very designed. It had the cherubims and the wings and all that, but it had the hooks on each side. I'm going to call them hooks or the circles, where they put the staves through, the wooden post through, so they could pick it up, right? They weren't supposed to touch it. Don't lay hands on it, but they had these things to move it. So that's the picture that we have. They would go and get these long poles. They would put it through each side, and they would pick it up. Similar to, not to be eerie, but similar to the way you would maybe pick up a coffin. They would all get together. They would all lift it at the same time. They would transport this with some degree of, I think, reverence and sacredness, for they knew that which they were carrying. God gave very important instructions on this. They were to take this Ark of the Covenant. That was to go first. And those that were carrying it, no doubt at least probably four, the way it was set up, those four were to go down to the edge of the Jordan River and step in. It said just the very bottom of their feet, right? Now, the river was swollen. The banks were swollen. It was flooded. It was that time of the year. We were told that. And so you think about that. If you've been to a flooded river or flooded creek, our family has a property up on the Sherman's Creek in Perry County. Floods all the time. When it floods and you get up there, the water that has now flooded and got up into the yards and so forth, it's pretty shallow. It's not moving as fast. It's moving real fast out in the middle, right? But up where it's kind of backed up into the property and backed up among the trees, it's kind of shallow, and just the grass starts to get soggy and wet. Think of that picture of them coming down to the edge of the Jordan River, and it's flooded. So they don't have to go down the bank and into the rocks of the creek. They're probably up on the field portion of it, up on the side of it, where it's flooded and swollen. And as soon as their feet, the bottoms of their feet, touch that, the water stops. The water parts. It gives us several different words. It says that the water was cut off from above. It says it was stood up in a heap. So this was similar to the Red Sea. Not as big of a body of water. But you and I can't stop a river from flowing. So God stops it. The water below them goes away. The water above them builds up in a heap and stops coming down in such a quantity as it had before. And it says they were able to cross on dry ground. That's what it said with the Red Sea. Dry ground. That doesn't happen, right? When the flood waters reside, when the water goes away, when you're on the bottom of a creek bed, it's usually muddy and sloppy and a mess. But not. So God has done a miraculous work. He's done something supernatural. He has defied the laws of nature. He's done something for this generation he had done for the previous generation at the Red Sea. And he has shown his power over nature, over creation. The water stopped. The ground suddenly becomes dry. That just doesn't happen. And they begin to walk over on this dry creek bed now of the Jordan River. They begin to go over. Let's look at a couple lessons I think we can learn from that. First of all, this was a time for the people to see God's power demonstrated. Right? These were people who had gotten, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago, but in some ways, they had gotten content in a routine of learning how to survive in this wilderness. If you look at their story, the 40-year period of time, at the beginning, that was a real struggle. Right? I mean, they were fighting. They didn't have water. They didn't have food. They didn't know what to do. They were up against enemies. There were so many problems, so many complaints. But as they got into the latter stages of it, they had learned to adapt. The manna came. God had supplied water numerous times. The enemies had started to fear them because of their size. We're going to see that, by the way, in chapter 4. They began to fear them. People kind of left them alone. They got into their routine. They knew what to do and how to do it. There was a system in place. So they had gotten kind of content. They hadn't seen really any great miracles for a while. I mean, if you look at the account, the great miracles were early at the Red Sea and at Mount Sinai, and water from the rock and manna coming. I mean, there were some amazing miracles but now there's a little more routine. For you and me, manna coming down would have been a surprise even after the 40th year, but for them, it had always been that way. So manna coming every day was just routine. Oh, by the way, we're going to see that stop in the next chapter or two as well. The manna is going to stop. They're going to have to learn to find their own food. They're in the promised land now. Things are going to change, and so they're going to see a demonstration of God's power in a very real way. Some of these maybe had not really seen that before, not to this extent. They had heard about the Red Sea. They had heard about Mount Sinai. They had heard about water from the rock. They were living with manna, so they had seen those things or heard about those things a little bit. But now God's doing something supernatural for them. They're going to see God's power on display, really for the first time, in an amazing way. I've preached this before, and let me give you a teaser for next week's message, right? In chapter number 4, it's all about them setting up a memorial, taking stones, building a memorial, remembering what God did. If you look at the history of the nation of Israel, especially moving forward from where we are, we get into the book of Judges, we get into the era of the kings. For the most part, especially in the book of Judges, there's this cycle every 40 years, right, of them serving God and then forgetting God and walking away from God, and then they need God and they cry out and God sends a judge and they're delivered and then they fall away again. It's this cycle. And I believe this to be true. I believe we need to see God alive and powerful in our lives and not just rely on the stories of what God did for those that were before us. All right? So let me give you just a little bit of a testimony here. I talked about this in my Sunday school class, my new member class, in some detail last week. But I was 5 years old. I was just turning 5 years old when my dad decided to leave his regular job at the stone quarry and go to Bible college. And it meant selling their house, leaving their jobs, moving 800 miles away, moving into a mobile home. Dad starting college. Dad started college the same day I started kindergarten. My dad, in the morning, we'd get up, we'd both pack, Mom would pack us both lunches, I don't think he had a Batman lunchbox, but I think I might have it I don't know what I had. I have no idea what I had. But some lunchbox, right? And off we'd go. We'd leave in the morning, and Dad would drop me off at kindergarten, and I would go, and then he would go over to college. He'd have class all day while I was having class all day in kindergarten, And then he'd pick me up on the way home, and we'd go home, eat a little something, and then my dad would go to work. He'd work 3 to 11 because he had to support a family. And so I was aware. I saw what God was doing in my parents' lives. This was the 1970s. Things were financially difficult, as I understand, right? I wasn't responsible for that. I wasn't aware of the gas lines and the high interest rates and the hard time selling your house, and all the difficulties people were going through in the 1970s. I lived it, but I was a kid. But I did see what God did in the lives of my parents. And I could sit here today and tell you one after the other of some miraculous things that God did for my mom and dad. I saw it. I think my mom and dad allowed me to see it. In other words, I don't think they hid it from me. I think they were wise enough to know that as I was 7, 8, 9 years old now, that they would be able to tell me, we didn't have the money for this. And God provided in a special way. You know, they were quick to give God the honor and glory. They didn't want to shield me and make me think that I was a rich kid or something when I wasn't, you know. No, when things were tight and things were tough and things were difficult and God provided, they showed that to me. And I saw that. I saw what my dad did and how hard he worked to get himself through college, to take care of his family, then later to start a church and to do all that. He worked full time through all of that. You know, it was a lot of work, a lot of extra hours, a lot of lack of sleep. And I saw God intervene in miraculous ways with phone calls, gifts, people coming to the door. I remember the night. I'll give you one. I remember the night. My dad had just started a church. And I remember the night that mom and dad really didn't know how they were going to pay for the rent next week. They did not know. You know, he had lost his job at a previous church. He had just started a church. He was just starting to work but hadn't got paid yet. There was a lapse in there. He didn't have any money. They didn't know where it was coming from. And Sunday night after church, like 9 o'clock at night, the phone rings. And it's a church that he was part of in Baltimore, Maryland, that called to say, hey, by the way, our church voted tonight. We took an offering for you. We're sending you $850 tomorrow. I was old enough to see my mom and dad hang up the phone and cry. Because God answered a very, very specific need that no one knew about in a supernatural way. Which all that helped to build my faith. Right? As a child, I built my faith as I saw that. That's very important. But you know what's more important? Is knowing that God can do that for me. I don't have to say, you should have seen what God did for my parents. How about when God answers my prayer in a very special way, in a very specific way? That's what's happening to the Israelites in this story, right? They've been riding this. Boy, God brought our parents across the Red Sea. He gave our parents water from the rock. He gave our parents the law, Mount Sinai, rumblings and thunder and amazing. You should have seen what he did for Moses and the powerful thing. You should have seen what God did. And God's like, I'm still here. You should see what I can do right now. And they go down to the banks of the river. Listen, it did not make sense to cross the river when the river's flooded. If it's our thinking and our reasoning, we'd be like, that was a terrible time to go. And God said, exactly, right? Because that's what man would come up with. God says, go down to the banks of the river, the flooded river. It's moving really fast, and we have a lot of people to get across. Joshua, how are we going to do this? Joshua's like, just wait and see. God told us to go. He's going to figure it out. And they go down and barely do their feet touch the water. The four carrying the ark, barely do their feet touch the water. And it stops, and it's dry, and they go across. There's going to be more details in chapter 4. Keep this in mind. Chapter 4 looks like the priest stood there all day to keep the water back. All day as the people kept going across. And it stayed dry until they stepped away on dry ground off the other side, and then the waters returned the way they were. God did something miraculous for them. It defies human logic because God was involved. God was demonstrating his power. And I'm asking you today, have you seen God answer prayer? Have you seen God work in your life? I hope we don't just hang on to, you should have seen what God did. for others in the past, for other people. That's good. That's exciting. We should know that. That helps build our foundation. But I think our faith becomes real and tangible when we say, let me tell you what God did for me. Let me tell you how he answered my prayer. Let me tell you how he did something in my life. That builds our faith. That's what God was doing for the nation of Israel in chapter 3. Second point, it was not only a time to demonstrate God's power, it was time for their faith to be stretched. And I got ahead of myself a little bit. I've talked about some of that. But it's time for their faith to be exercised, for their faith to be stretched. How's this going to work? Joshua, what are we going to do? How are we getting all these people across? Hey, listen, I think this is important. Joshua wasn't just talking to a bunch of guys. Because a bunch of guys would be like, oh, we'll figure it out. Right? We'll get a little wet. It'll be all right. No. You got mothers and children, that are going to go across this thing. And moms are like, I'm not wading out there with my baby, It's flooded. Let's find another way. No, it was time for their faith to be stretched. Like, God has a plan in place. Let's follow what God's going to do. He brought us here. He knows where we're at, when we're doing it, everything that's involved. If he wants us to go across, he'll figure it out. It was a time for Joshua to show that leadership in his faith. It was time for the people to exercise it as well. God's going to do something for us. I don't know all that he's going to do or how it's going to work. I don't have a good answer for you, right? Imagine if you knew some of the details. You go home like, hey, hon, God's going to stop the river. How's that going to work? I don't know. God does it, There has to be faith involved. That something amazing is going to happen here. This was, number 3, this was all new to them. That was my message a couple weeks ago. They were doing something they'd never done before, going places they'd never gone before. All this was new. And because of that, here's a few points. 1, Joshua told them to sanctify themselves. He's like, we're not heading in to this event with God doing something amazing if there's sin in our lives. Make sure your relationship with God is where it's supposed to be. If we're going in, get things right with God. Right? Let's do this in the right place at the right time with the right heart. So sanctify yourselves, prepare yourselves, because God's going to do something great, but let's not do it with sin in our lives. We're going to see what happens at Ai when there's sin in their lives. Right? It was a time for them to expect a miracle. God was going to have to do something that they couldn't do. It was a time for them to face the obstacle. I think that's important. They had to go down and face the river. Not ignore it, not hope it went away, not look for another way. Right? They had to face it. It was going to happen. How about this? It looks like they all packed up their tents. You ever pack up camp? Destiny and I go camping, right? Putting up stuff's okay, but taking down sometimes the worst, And at some point, you're just throwing stuff in the back of the truck, Let's go home. We'll worry about it later. You got kids. Camp was set up. Now camp has come down. It's all packed up. It's all packed up, and the river is still flooded, What are we doing? Where are we going? Where are we sleeping tonight? Joshua's like, we're sleeping on that side. How are we doing that? God's going to have to do something miraculous. It was a time to watch God work, right? It was nothing they could do. It wasn't them, right? The people, they weren't able to do it, magically make something happen, come up with something innovative. This was a time to just sit back and watch God do it. Because God was going to do something man couldn't do. It was a time for them to honor God. God's going to get the glory for this. And here, number 1, the people realized that Joshua is in tune with God. When Joshua said this was the right time, the right place, we're going to do it, God made sure that happened. So the people didn't have to doubt Joshua. They knew that Joshua was in tune with God. They knew that. He was God's leader. Number two, God was glorified because the people knew that God did something they couldn't do. God got the glory for it. God did something miraculous. We're going to see in the next couple of chapters, you know what happens to all of the enemy cities when they hear how the people crossed the Jordan River? They were already concerned because 40 years ago, that Red Sea divided for those people. And now here they come, and didn't the Jordan River divide too? Chapter 4 or 5 tells us their heart did melt. Melt. They knew it was something more powerful than that nomadic tribe of people. Men, women, children, cattle. They're not an army. Something is bigger than them. It's an almighty God. God was honored. God was glorified. God got the praise. In chapter number 4, we're going to see those memorials built. Because God said, I want you to remember what I did. In times to come, down the road, people are going to forget. I want to talk about that next week. We are real good in America at forgetting. We're real good at forgetting. I think we do it every 4 years here. Yeah. If you know what I mean. We forget so quick. We go back to the old ways so quick. The bad habits so quick. God set up memorials so that they would remember. We're going to talk about that in chapter number 4 next week. I'm going to wrap up a little bit early today, and that's because we are going to have a vote today. And so I'm going to conclude our message. We're going to have a word of prayer and sing our song like we always do. And then at the end, there are ballots. If you didn't get one on the Welcome Center, pick one up. They're a little third sheet of paper. They look like this. Pick one up and come back in if you're a member. We'll have a quick meeting. I'll give you some information. You can vote and let you go. That's our plan for the day. With that in mind, let's have a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we do thank you for the time we have here today. Lord, it's good to be in your house. Lord, I pray that we can learn from the lessons of Joshua chapter 3. Lord, we need to see you real in our lives. Lord, I think there's a lot of us that need to exercise our faith a little more. Lord, that need to sit back and let you work and then give you the honor and the glory and the praise when we realize you did something